You ready?
Yep.
All right. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. Very excited to have as my guest today, Dr. Orna Guralnik. Orna, welcome.
Thank you, Guy. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. So Dr. Orna Guralnik is a clinical psychologist and psychoanalyst practicing in New York City. She's on faculty at the National Institute for the Psychotherapies in New York City, where she teaches courses on the transgenerational transmission of trauma, socio-politics, ideology, and psychoanalysis, and on dissociation. Currently, Dr. Guralnik lectures and publishes on the topics of couples treatment and culture, dissociation and depersonalization, as well as culture and psychoanalysis. She's also the therapist on the SHOWTIME documentary series, Couples Therapy. Orna, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So before we get going, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
I'm actually originally from the US, but I spent like an important part of my life in Israel as a young person, teenager, and did my first degree in Israel, did the army in Israel, and moved back to the States for grad school and stayed here ever since grad school, psychoanalytic training and the rest.
I want to kind of start and ask you about your interest in mental health and psychoanalysis in particular. How did this start for you?
It's one of those questions that, every few years you have a different understanding of it. Like Nachtraglichkeit, you go back and you're like, oh, actually, I think it really started then.
Yeah.
And no, it really was that. It was that book I read, or it was like, but the simple answer is I was in therapy as a teenager. My parents kind of pushed me into therapy. I had no interest in it. And first of all, the therapy itself, the person I worked with, the therapy really changed my life in kind of a profound way. And then I started doing a lot of reading at the time, from like Freud to R.D. Laing, and just that whole language opened up such a door for me to understand what's going on around me that it changed my life in many different ways. And that's when I kind of got the first bug.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't sure. I mean, I did other things. I dabbled in the arts and other things.
So what age are we talking now at this point?
This was as a teenager.
Okay.
And then did my first degree in film and did other things. But I kept kind of gravitating back. I started a clinical psych program in Israel, and then I was like, no, actually, I don't really want to be a clinician, left it for a while, and then came back. And finally, I was like, you know what? I think this is my calling.
Wow.
So it took me a while, but a lot of it had to do with my own experience
Of
both being in therapy and reading and kind of using that language to understand the world around me.
mm-hmm. Reading your biography, obviously there's a strong interest in trauma, transgenerational trauma. How did that show up for you? How did you experience that? And how did that impact your decision to go forward into becoming a therapist, psychoanalyst?
Well, I think part of it had to do both with moving between two different cultures, between the United States and Israel, and back to the United States. And I lived in a couple of other places in the world, and also growing up to parents my parents are Israeli, but left Israel, and then came back to Israel, and their parents were in Europe and left because of the war to Israel. So there was a lot of both trauma, but also a lot of like major cultural shifts in our intergenerational history of my family and lots of other Jewish and Israeli families. And then my own moves kind of primed me to, first of all, to kind of have an interest and almost like a visceral awareness of how culture really shapes the way one thinks, and how switching between cultures opens your mind to the way that we're captured by a particular collective, by a particular history, including its traumas.
Mm-hmm.
There were many things about my own parents that I didn't really understand until I put it in the context of intergenerational transmission of
Mm.
history and trauma.
Now, when you decided to move forward with your studies in psychoanalysis, well, let's talk about that. How did that come about? Okay, I want to, because a lot of people don't necessarily go into psychoanalysis, they become quote unquote therapists of a different kind. Why psychoanalysis for you? What was so potent there?
Right. Um, I always thought, since my own therapeutic journey, the person I worked with was psychoanalytically oriented, and the books I gravitated towards were psychoanalytic. But I had when I finished grad school, I got into empirical work, into research, actually research on trauma, and then somehow, how life kind of presents you with all sorts of things. I somehow got into more organizational and business work, and did that. We had a company. I created a company with a few people, and immersed myself in that world. Kind of, it was like New York, kind of the .com
Mm.
/ Wall Street romance or bromance. And I was thick in that, and after a while, I became frankly really alienated by that, and I was looking for something that will be like the true counterbalance to that.
I was going to say, as you were talking, I was thinking it's almost like diametrically opposite.
Yeah, I was just like, give me the thing that's gonna like really cure me of the toxic values I've been ingesting, and a way out of that, and went back to psychoanalysis, and it did it.
It's so interesting. I mean, let's talk about the show here. How did this come about for you?
The show,
Yeah.
the show was a total fluke out of left field. Someone from my institute, from NYU postdoc, connected me
Mm.
to the directors. And since I had like my first degree was in film, I thought, oh, I'd talk to them and maybe consult to them. And actually, one of the directors just sent me the video of our first conversation when we just talked on Zoom. And we just really hit it off. We had this like really amazing conversation about psychoanalysis and documentary film and the parallels between them, and it just became like this incredible meeting of minds. And very quickly I became quite involved with them, and they were like, can you please, why don't you try to be the therapist on the show? And I'm like, what are you talking about? I can't function in front of a camera. I've got no dramatic bone in me. And they were like, we're documentarians, just try. And I did. I just did a session, like a test session in front of the cameras, and I was just like, oh, it's sort of the same as being in my office. We just do our work. And I don't know, we just started working from there.
And how many years ago was that?
That was 6 years ago.
It was 6 years ago. So look, let me just say, when I first started watching this show, I mean, there's something, you just have this like presence and groundedness about you that seems to cut through, not just as a therapist, but the culture that we're living in right now. It's just so, I don't know, maybe direct, open, honest, reflective. That just, how long did it take for you to develop that? Obviously, you've been doing this for a while.
Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for describing it that way. That's nice to hear. First of all, it's really not just me. I mean, I'm the face there, but it's really this team, the people I'm
Mm.
working with. They all have this quality of, they're really documentarians. They came from politics, and the feeling with this group of people is a real search for truth, an interest in truth, a curiosity about truth, and a lot of respect for like human dignity. They really have their eye on the ball of what matters, and they don't get distracted by bullshit. They're really good people. So it's not just me, it's sort of the whole team is sort of sitting there and like, okay, what matters? And what matters right now in this culture, in this moment? The choice of couples, in the support for me and working with the couples. It's really an incredible team. It's really kind of a milieu treatment.
So the whole thing is very interesting. I mean, obviously there's limited confidentiality.
No
right?
confidentiality.
No confidentiality. So how are you doing this? Is it this? Are
Right.
you providing therapy, psychoanalysis? They're not patients, right? You're considered an actor.
Right. Right. I know it's a very complicated tension, and it's not a simple one. It's not, I can't shrug it off and say, oh, no big deal. It's complicated to be doing something that is therapy adjacent without confidentiality. I mean, confidentiality is like our main frame, our main tool. When we contract with our patients, we're like, it's between us here in this room, and unless you're about to kill yourself or somebody else, we will never, ever disclose what happened here. And that's what creates safety. And here, all of that is gone. So in a certain way, it's like bizarre that it even works. But I guess certain things kind of compensate for it. But the contract between the participants and me is not a therapist-patient contract. They're participating in a documentary. So by contract, we're not patient therapist, we're participant and me.
But at the same time, you're providing therapy?
Yeah. It's just officially, it's not, I'm using the tools of an analyst and a couples therapist and a systems therapist. It's just the contract between us is officially not a therapy contract. But they're not paying me. It's no confidentiality. There are all sorts of aspects of the frame that are removed, and instead there's something else. There are other people witnessing it all along. It's going to be edited. They're going to see it. Anyone's going to see it.
Right. And obviously, what's also interesting is when they cut to you and your different groups, they're seeing that. And
Right.
But first, I want to go back, because when I talked about your presence, you said, well, it's a group effort. It's kind of
Right.
like, Tom Brady saying, well, it's the whole team type thing.
Right.
But you have a particular way about you. How did you develop that? That just doesn't come about.
I didn't, the way I work or the way I interact or the way I am on camera is not different from the way I am in the rest of my life. I mean, that's been a relief for me, a relief for my patients, a relief for my friends and family to see that I'm the same person. And I think the quality that probably works for this series is kind of a cross-cultural thing. It's the fact that I'm kind of this hybrid between like Israeli, American, and some other influences there. So, when you're hybrid, you're both and, which gives you, I think it gives me some, it's not only me, it's people that have lived in different cultures. It gives you, you're never completely embedded in one perspective. And there's a certain freedom in that, and a certain, like, you never totally drink the Kool-Aid of any one particular domain. And there's freedom in that, and it gives you, I guess, a certain kind of directness, or maybe, I don't know, something about that I think works for people.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I mean, it's a constellation of these qualities and the timing. For example, you know, if we could, you know, during this last season, there was one couple, and the gentleman you were having a kind of a tension with, but it was interesting to see how you work with that, and you moved into it in such a way that I felt was really refreshing. We don't see a lot of it in our world, in our life, and it was done in such a compassionate way.
are you
Um,
talking about Sean and Erica?
yeah,
Yeah, that was
yeah,
hard. That was hard.
yeah. We saw that, and it just made me feel like that kind of directness, that walking into the fire, if you
Yeah.
will, breathes life, I think, into who we are and how we interact with people.
Interesting.
That comes about in my mind. I mean, from a certain experience, and like you said, being able to straddle these different worlds, it kind of gives you a pass in a way, or not even a pass, but um, how did you approach that? Did a lot of thought go into that? Does a lot of thinking go into this, or is there just a lot
Yeah.
of self trust and
No, definitely a lot of thought and conversations, both with my team and with my peers. Um, that again, I'm going to go back to my directors and my team, which is I would after every session we would sit and talk, and I would share with them, both thoughts about the process and my own kind of transference and how I'm thinking about this, and they were like, look, the struggle you're going through is important for the audience.
mm,
This is not just your struggle. This is information that would be useful for the audience, for anyone who struggles with this, anyone who's in interaction with someone that they can't empathize with, or they find their language doesn't work with that person. Like this is a struggle worth sitting with, and let us be part of it. And we're not gonna, we're supporting you and whatever you need, but let us be part of it, which is the stance they had all along with any
mm,
difficulty that came up, or ethical questions that came up. They were like, let us sit with you and struggle with you. This is going to be important
mm,
for the audience. We don't need you to give us something pretty. Just let us be with you.
right? Yeah.
Just trust that. I do trust that that's what we all really ultimately need. We don't need a beautiful picture. We need to know how do you try to be honest with what's going on. So
How did your interest in couples therapy bloom?
um that's funny. I often have said that it started with my parents. They were my first couple. And they agree with me. They still, I mean, my dad passed this last year. He died a year ago, but he till the day he died, he was just like, "Can you give us a little more therapy? We could use a little more." um, so I think it started there, probably for many couples therapists and therapists in general. They start by dealing with the people they're closest to, their parents. Um, but I also think working with groups and with systems, and then having interest in politics and how political systems kind of resolve difference is, you take that interest and then it's very relevant to couples.
Mm-hmm.
I often talk about couples as a mini political system. So, if I have a hope that Republicans and Democrats can figure out their differences, or Israelis and Palestinians should like be able to resolve their impasse, surely I can find a way to work with a couple.
It's very interesting that you mentioned that because those issues certainly come up in this last season here. I'm thinking of the two women, that couple,
In
and
and
then the other
indeed.
couple who were almost battling in the politics of what relationships are. You know,
You're talking about
um,
Christian Brock?
it's interesting to hear you talk about how this show, and I'm curious about, you had such strong feelings when you were working with those two women. Obviously, there were a lot of issues coming up. Can you talk just a little bit about that?
Oh, they were just so moving and beautiful to work with. Painful, very painful, but I mean, in addition to them being each as a person, just a lovely person and very honest and sensitive and verbal and like going willing to put themselves out there really with like full honesty. I mean, it was really incredible to work with these women. But then it also had this other layer of Christine being Palestinian, and my people, Israelis, kind of having like severely traumatized her people, and our attempt to kind of talk through that, which continued after the show also. And then Nadine being half Lebanese, my brother went to Lebanon in a tank.
Mm.
Uh, just that history between us and our willingness to hold it in mind and talk to each other and keep working through that was another layer of what it means to try to sit with difference and find a way to have respect and honor each other's dignity and acknowledge wrongdoings. It was like very layered and deeply personally important for me to be able to sit with them, and hold to that.
It was beautiful to see. I mean, are you conscious of your role, like as a psychoanalyst, and then as a actor in a documentary? I mean, are there different hats you have to wear? Because I'm curious, if this wasn't a documentary, would there have been a different interaction, different sharing on your part, if at all?
It's a good question. Both and in many ways I function the way I'd function in my private practice. I mean, I have my ways of thinking that are analytic and my own and just my own personality and history and clinical experience. But then I also do have a certain kind of responsibility to both the filmmakers and the audience in mind. Um, Both in terms of there are certain things that I will not ask the participants to talk about because I think that will put them in a bad situation. Like I won't ask them to talk about their kids.
Mm.
There's certain things that I won't ask them to talk about. Um, and then there's a way in which I'm on some level, it's not top of mind, but in the back of my mind, I'm aware of the fact that we're also speaking for and to a larger public. So there's always some kind of political hope in the back of my mind that we're doing something to heal the collective. I mean, it might be kind of omnipotent and grandiose, but I think we all have that in mind. Even the participants I know have that in mind. Like, when we had like someone who was struggling with their alcoholism, they had in the back of their mind that it's not just them, it's other people with
Mm-hmm.
that history that are hopefully going to benefit from their honesty. And I think everyone had that in mind, that it's like that there's some level of like communal service in doing this.
Yeah. Well, it certainly comes across. I mean, as you were talking, I was just thinking all the different elements that go into the show, and they form or are continuing to form this like beautiful solar system that's working. You know, it's really exciting. Is there going to be a next season?
I'm officially not supposed to say what, but yes, there are going to be more seasons. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
Orna, it's a pleasure having you on here. I don't want to take too much of your time, but my gosh, what an honor to meet you and to talk to you, and just so appreciate you and how you work. I mean, from the first time I was like watching, I was like, wow, you know, just the way you cut through, and doesn't even have to be with language, but a gesture and an acknowledgement and a witnessing, you know. So we need this. So I will end with that.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. How can people learn about the show? Just go to Showtime or what?
The show is on Showtime / now it's Paramount Plus. Yeah, you can get out or sign up. Yeah.
Okay. All right. We'll have that linked up here at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Orna, awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye.